The crowded Navy-based chow hall hummed with the usual lunchtime chaos. Trays clattered, chairs scraped against the linoleum, and the air was thick with the smell of steamed table food and the loud, boisterous conversations of hundreds of young men in uniform. For most, it was a brief respite from the day's relentless physical training and classes. For Petty Officer Second Class Sarah Jenkins, it was just another meal in a long line of meals since she'd checked into the command 3 weeks prior. Sarah kept her head down, focused on the grilled chicken and rice on her tray. She was the new variable in this tightly knit ecosystem, and she felt the weight of every stare. As one of the few women on the base, and more specifically as a newly qualified SEAL, she was an anomaly. The men around her were the tip of the spear, the best of the best. And their world was a brotherhood built on proving oneself through sheer, unforgiving physical grit. She had survived Hell Week, the single toughest military training in the world. She had endured the freezing surf, the endless runs in the soft sand, the bone-deep exhaustion designed to break the spirit. She had earned her trident, but here, in the unofficial hierarchy of the teams, she knew the proving never really stopped. She found an empty seat at the end of a long table near the back, far from the main thoroughfare. She wasn't looking for trouble. She just wanted to eat in peace. She was methodically cutting her chicken when the ambient noise in her immediate vicinity seemed to drop a few decibels. She didn't need to look up. She could feel the presence of someone looming over her table, a shadow falling across her tray. "Well, ah well," a voice drawled, dripping with a performative arrogance. "Look what the tide washed in. They're letting anyone sit with the grown-ups now, huh?" Sarah took a slow, deliberate bite of her chicken, chewing calmly before looking up. Standing before her was a solidly built Marine gunnery sergeant, his uniform crisp, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms thick with muscle and tattoos. He had the look of a man who had been the biggest frog in a small pond for a very long time. Behind him, 2 younger Marines stood smirking, their arms crossed, ready for a show. "You must be the new SEAL," the gunny continued, his voice loud enough to turn heads at nearby tables. "Heard we got one. You know, I've been in this man's Marine Corps for 15 years. I've done 2 tours. I've seen real combat, and I've never seen anything that proves a woman belongs in the teams. It's a participation trophy. That's all it is." The accusation hung in the air. It was the same underlying current of resentment she'd felt since her first day. The belief that the standards had been lowered, that she was a symbol of political correctness rather than a lethal operator. Sarah's eyes, a calm and steady gray, met his. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, and didn't stand. To stand would be to accept his invitation to a confrontation on his terms. "That's an interesting perspective, Gunny," she said, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through the low murmur that had now fallen over their section of the chow hall. "Is there something specific you needed?" Her lack of a reaction seemed to irritate him more than if she'd screamed back, but he leaned down, placing his knuckles on the table, getting closer to her personal space. "What I need is for you to understand that this little PR stunt of yours ends here. When we go out into the real world, on a real deployment, I don't want to have to worry about dragging your dead weight out of a firefight. The men in this room, we carry the load. You're just baggage." The 2 Marines behind him snickered. Sarah could feel the eyes of dozens of other sailors and Marines on her, waiting to see what the new SEAL was made of. This was a test, and not one that could be passed with a PT score. This was a test of something far more fundamental. She set her fork down gently and dabbed her mouth with a napkin. "Gunnery Sergeant," she began, her tone still unnervingly placid. "You've outlined a concern. You believe I am a liability. That you believe my presence here diminishes the readiness of this command." She paused, letting the words sink in. "That's a pretty serious accusation, one that, if true, I should be removed from the teams for. And if it's false, It says a lot about your own judgment. The gunny straightened up, a smirk playing on his lips. He thought he had her. He thought she was about to make a scene, complain to the command master chief, or burst into tears. He'd seen it before with other women in non-combat roles. He was baiting her to run to authority, to prove his point that she was weak. "So, what are you going to do about it, princess? Gonna go tell your daddy I was mean to you?" he goaded. Sarah finally stood up. She wasn't tall, but the way she moved, a coiled, economical shift of weight, silenced the last of the background chatter. Yeah, she was now eye to eye with him, her posture relaxed but utterly balanced. "No, Gunny, I'm not going to tell anyone," she said. "I'm going to give you exactly what you want. You've questioned my ability to carry the load. You've questioned the integrity of the training I went through. So let's settle it. Right now." She gestured with her chin toward the large glass windows at the far end of the chow hall. Beyond them was the obstacle course, the oak course, its wooden structures stark against the gray sky, a favorite place for the men to unofficially settle disputes of pride. "You and me, 1 lap, full course, full combat load," she said, her voice now carrying a hard edge. "We go right now in our boots and these uniforms. We'll see who's carrying whose dead weight." A ripple of shocked whispers went through the crowd, and the gunny's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He hadn't expected this. He expected her to fold, to reveal the weakness he was so certain existed. He was a Marine, a lifer, confident in his physical prowess. But the oak course with full gear was a beast, a brutal, lung-busting, muscle-shredding test. He looked at her, searching for the bluff. "You're on," he said, his voice a low growl. He turned to his 2 companions. "Get our gear. We'll do this right." He was committed now. He had to prove a point in front of his men. Backing down from a challenge issued by a woman in front of half the base was unthinkable. Word spread through the chow hall like wildfire. By the time Sarah and the gunny walked out the doors, a crowd of at least 50 sailors and Marines had gathered along the edge of the course, their lunches forgotten. And the atmosphere was electric, a mix of anticipation and disbelief. Senior chiefs and master sergeants stood in small groups, arms crossed, faces unreadable. They weren't going to stop this. This was a matter of honor, and it would be settled in the dirt. The combat load was simple: a standard-issue M4 rifle and a heavy plate carrier vest loaded with training plates. It added an extra 40 pounds of awkward, shifting weight. Sarah shrugged into her vest, feeling the familiar, uncomfortable pressure on her shoulders and hips. She checked the mock magazine in her rifle, ensuring it was seated. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at the gunny, who was across from her at the start line, doing exaggerated neck rolls and bouncing on his toes, playing to the audience. A tall, grizzled Master Chief, his trident pin glinting on his chest, stepped forward. He didn't ask for permission. He simply assumed the role of starter. He looked at both of them, his eyes lingering on Sarah for a moment. There was no warmth in his gaze, only a cold, professional assessment. "The O course, standard rules. You miss an obstacle, you go back and do it again. Time starts now." The gunny exploded off the line, a burst of aggressive energy. He hit the first obstacle, the towering rope climb, with a grunt, using his powerful upper body to haul himself up hand over hand. He was fast, experienced, and fueled by adrenaline and arrogance. Sarah started at her own pace. Her movement was not explosive, but fluid. She hit the rope and climbed with a technique that was all legs, wrapping the rope around her boot and using her powerful thighs to push up. Saving her arm strength for later. She was already a few seconds behind, but her heart rate was steady, her breathing controlled. The course was a symphony of pain. The weaver, a series of zigzagging logs, demanded agility. The Belgian draft, a set of massive, unevenly spaced logs, required jumping precision. The gunny stormed through them, his speed fueled by rage. He was ahead, and the crowd cheered for him, a wall of sound cheering on the Marine. Sarah took each obstacle methodically. At the Burma pit, a series of tires suspended over mud, She didn't rush and lose her balance. She moved with a cat-like grace, her rifle always under control. She could feel the burn in her lungs, the weight of the vest digging into her collarbone. But this was nothing new. And Hell Week had taught her to function with far less sleep and far more pain. Then came the halfway point, the pitch black. It was a 15-foot-high, 30-foot-long cargo net stretched over a pit. The gunny hit it hard, scrambling up the netting, but his aggression was costing him. His breathing was becoming ragged, his form sloppy. He crested the top and started his descent, but his boot caught in the netting. He stumbled, flailing for a moment before catching himself, losing precious seconds. Sarah hit the net a few moments later. She didn't scramble. She climbed like a spider, using the same measured pace, finding the rhythm. She was gaining on him. The last major obstacle was the slide for life, a series of thick cables suspended high above the ground, running at a steep angle down to a sand pit. You had to hang from the cable and pull yourself across, hand over hand, with nothing below you but hard-packed dirt. It was an upper-body destroyer. By the time the gunny reached the base of the slide, his face was crimson, sweat pouring down his face, soaking his uniform. His arms were screaming. He grabbed the cable, jumped, and began pulling. He made it a quarter of the way before his pace slowed to a crawl. He was hanging there, muscles trembling with the strain of his own weight plus the gear. Sarah arrived at the base as he was barely halfway. She looked up, saw his struggle, and then grabbed her own cable. She launched herself into the air and began to pull. She used her whole body, swinging her legs to generate momentum, taking the load off her fatigued arms. She moved down the cable with a speed that was astonishing, her body a pendulum of controlled power. As she passed him, their eyes met. He was frozen, his face a mask of agony and disbelief. He was failing. She didn't smirk. She didn't say a word. She just kept moving, her eyes focused on the finish line ahead. She dropped into the sand pit, her boots sinking deep. The final stretch was a flat-out sprint to the finish line where the Master Chief stood. She pumped her arms, her legs burning, her vision narrowing to a tunnel. She crossed the line and immediately dropped into a controlled pant, hands on her knees, letting the oxygen flood back into her system. A full 30 seconds later, the gunny staggered across the line. He didn't drop. He just stopped, his body heaving, his head down. He was defeated, and the silence from the crowd was deafening. They had just witnessed something they didn't think possible. Sarah slowly stood up straight. She took off her vest and laid her rifle on the ground. Her chest was heaving, but she walked over to where the gunny stood, hunched over, trying to catch his breath. She stood in front of him, waiting. He finally looked up, his eyes a mixture of shame, exhaustion, and raw hatred. "Gunnery Sergeant," she said, her voice quiet, just for him. "The load is heavy, but the teams don't carry the weak. We carry the mission, and we carry each other. I can carry my own weight. The question is, can you?" She didn't wait for an answer. She turned and walked back toward the chow hall to retrieve her cover. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't bask in any glory. She simply walked away. The Master Chief who had started the race watched her go. He then looked at the broken Marine, still gasping for air. He said nothing, but the message was clear. The lesson was not lost on anyone who had watched. The story of the O-Course spread through the base faster than any rumor mill could manufacture. It wasn't just that Sarah had won. It was how she had won. She didn't gloat. She didn't humiliate him further. Her simple, quiet question was the most devastating blow of all. Within a week, the dynamic had shifted. The open hostility didn't vanish overnight, but the overt challenges did. People saw her in the gym, on the runs, and they didn't see a participant. They saw a quiet, focused operator who let her actions do the talking. The gunny, on the other hand, found his own standing diminished. The aura of invincibility he had cultivated was shattered. And his words about carrying the load were now met with sideways glances and whispers. He had challenged the new SEAL and had been proven, in front of everyone, to be the lesser man. Weeks later, Sarah was running a training evolution with a platoon of Marines, the gunny's own platoon. They were doing small unit tactics, and she was leading the squad through a simulated ambush. Her commands were clear, her movements decisive. She was professional. After the drill, as the men were rehydrating, one of the younger Marines who had been with the gunny that day in the chow hall walked up to her. "Petty Officer Jenkins," he said, his voice hesitant. I just wanted to say, that day on the course, that was something else." Sarah looked at him, her expression softening just slightly. "It was just PT," she said, and the Marine shook his head. "No, ma'am, it wasn't." He nodded once, a gesture of respect, and walked back to his squad. She watched him go, then turned her attention back to her gear, checking her rifle, preparing for the next drill. The burden of being first, of being the only one, was still there. It was a weight she carried every single day. But that day, on the obstacle course, she had proven she could carry it, and more importantly, she had forced them to see that the weight of a man is not measured by his bravado, but by his actions. The bully's career wasn't ended by a formal complaint or a letter in his file. It was ended in the most fundamental way possible in the world of special operations, by being publicly, undeniably, and completely outperformed by the person he had dismissed. And in that world, and that is a reputation from which there is no recovery.